Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Oh, Root. Have you ever had that feeling? That ever thought of, oh man, I just wish, oh, this looks so good. Oh, this is enticing. 2 to 4 players, 60 to 90 minutes? Ages 10 and up? Oh, yeah, this is much more than that, right? Are you one of those people like me that looks at this and goes, I wish I could play this. I wish I had something with asymmetric factions, with upgradable powers, meaningful action selection as we go along in sort of a semi-area control, victory point style-esque game. Does that sound good to you? Wow. Let's talk about Harrow County. Upcoming from Off the Page Games. This is going to be launching on crowdfunding, and what do you need to know? What are my thoughts on it? And everything in between to give you the best impression to find out whether or not this game's right for you. Let's do this. Now, if this is the first you're hearing of this game, let me be very clear. This is from the same company that brought you Mind Management. This is also Jay Cormier, the same designer from Mind Management, now with a different partner, Shad, in this game. But let me also tell you that you should have Jay on your radars now, because this is 2 really freaking sweet games in a row. And what do you need to know about this game to figure out whether or not it's right for you? Now, if you know me, I love 1 versus 1 asymmetric games, right? I love me some skirmish. I love me card games. I love me upgradable powers and abilities, Exceed, Yomi, BattleCon, all of those sorts of things, right? And, those are card games. I just reviewed earlier on the channel The War of the Ring, the card game. So another battling back and forth game. And so this takes on the role of a 1 versus 1 asymmetric, not really skirmish, but deduction, grid-based, King of the Hill, movement-based, with route building, pick up and deliver, and secret unit deployment. Now, does that sound like a lot going on? Let me be very frank with you. It is. But this is what you need to know about it, is that it introduces itself, and this is point number 1 here, in a very routine manner. And now I won't say that it's easy, because the rule book for this introduces you slowly to the 4 various mason jars that you will be utilizing on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round action selection, because that's really what this core of this game is about. It's about action selection and then action manipulation. And what I mean by that is, on a turn-by-turn basis, you're going to be flipping over one of 4 mason jars that control your 4 basic actions: attack, wild, abilities, and legendary character ability powers. And the tricky part is, depending on if you are one of the 3 different factions that you can be, the family, the protectors, or something else, they all do them slightly differently. They're all going to have the same core of those 4 actions, but the ability of each different faction to manipulate the way that that actual ability takes place on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis, the choices that it gives you, essentially, with a sort of a action tree that you can kind of go down and say, okay, well, this is, this, and then this one, and I can go this way. A very tactical, nuanced decision-making plan, as opposed to just, I have this action and I take this every turn, right? If you play the ability action as the protectorate, you have potentially one of 3 different things you can do. You can spawn, you can strengthen, or you can move. And you can increase how strong each of those actions are by going around, picking up ability tokens, and layering them on your player board. Whereas the family has the same action, for example, but they're pulling chits from a bag, and so they have always the dynamic of, when they get those extra chits from the board, do they increase the number of chits that they're pulling, or do they increase the number of chits in the bag, because you may want one or the other. And then they get to take not just the one that the family does of maybe, a 4 strength, of 4 moves, or 4 strengthens, putting your cubes into the queue for the tower, or 4 spawns of the haints on the board, but they might be able to pull 4 chits from the bag and get 2 moves, a spawn, and a strengthen. Let me be very clear. This is a very, 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 in case that's not enough, tactical game. Because you are playing up to 7 points per round, per game session scenario, if you will, and this is point number 2, I guess. 7 sounds like a lot. 7 sounds like a lot in a lot of these games. It's not in this game. It's not. This game is more of a race, if you will, but you don't realize it's a race as you're starting, almost your engine slowly building up as you get the ability to draw more tokens from the bag, or as you get the ability to increase how strong your individual actions are, whether it is that the abilities of the protectorate, the individual ones I just mentioned, or the actual legendary characters' powers that they have access to, the power and their ability, both of which are going to be manipulating conditions on the board, anywhere from cubes to things that are going to allow you to move faster, or even things that are going to block the paths or ensnare them as a whole, depending on which faction you take the role of on a scenario by scenario basis. Now, the similarity to Root in the sense that you are slowly developing more actions, you are getting more programming, you are getting more sense of what you need to do on this sort of area control hex-based situational map. But it still has the asymmetry that Root has, to go back to that comparison earlier. But it takes the overhead of Root. It takes the knowledge base that you have to have, but it makes it more manageable that if I only need to know what one other faction is doing, right? That's the big barrier with Root, is accessibility. And this is point 3. Accessibility is the key with this game. I can teach my wife this game, and we can play a full game feeling like we're getting the full experience in a very short manner of about a little over an hour. And like I said at the beginning, you can't do that with Root. As much as I'm going to make the comparison to that or something else like Vast or anything along those lines, Oath, whatever it may be, right? That has similar vibes, but again, I'm not saying is completely the same by any means, but it scratches in that way, that itch that maybe you have, or maybe you've wanted to, because this is also not a war game. This is an asymmetric, tactically driven, pseudo engine building, pick up and deliver, smash and grab, outmaneuver game. And it makes you feel pretty good when you can do it. Now, going back to what I said earlier, the rulebook itself is better laid out than Root, because the big problem, like I mentioned, is Root, the rule book, the learn to play, especially if you are the one trying to teach everyone else, right? Not only do you have to make sure they know their own factions, but they have to know what the other factions are capable of to get the full meta and the full dynamic that's in the game that makes the game amazing in the first place. And that's sort of like sticking your mouth over the opening of a fire hydrant, right? Just, you can do it. It's not going to feel very good for very long, though. And so the fact that you've got 2 here, but also, and I love this, and I give them a lot of kudos, off the page games, a lot of games that are this complex, right? They just assume, okay, read through the rule book and assimilate it all and incorporate it and then just put it to the table, right? The introduction of elements as you go through the scenarios. Weirdly enough, the comparison I'm going to make here is it reminds me very much of Disney's Sorcerer's Arena. This game up there, which is sitting right here. And that's because their rulebook does the exact same thing, right? It says, okay, if you want to play, there's the intro, how to play, we're going to give you some terms, we're going to give you some options, we're going to give you some playthrough, and then, okay, you want to take the step up? We're not subtracting things. The original way, if you just played it at that, you would still be, relatively happy with, but you want an additional element, you're ready for some additional complexity, you want a little spice of life, you want to throw a little cumin, a little paprika in there, we can up it again, and we can up it again. Give me more ability cards, give me more asymmetric powers, give me more characters that I can then utilize to find out which one suits me the best with the same actions and general abilities, but now with a slightly different dynamic in how they manipulate the board and how they play things slightly differently than their cohorts on either of the factions that I mentioned. Intrigued? You should be. And now if I'm going to do an adequate, apt Root comparison, right, we can't have just 2 factions, we have to have a third and a fourth. And that is sort of the yin and the yang there, because the third faction is Kami and the Goblins. The fourth faction is really a separate player, Hester, which is really primarily used in the 3-player scenarios that I have not done. Truth be told, didn't get a chance to play at 3 players, so I can't speak to that. You're going to have to look for other videos that are going to talk to you about if you're looking at it mainly from a 3-player aspect. But if you want a little bit more information, the third faction, the goblins and Kami. Kami basically lost her soul. She's trying to acquire it back through getting the dolls back, which are the equivalent of the buildings for the family that they're trying to destroy, and the townsfolk who the protectors are trying to gather into them in order to get their points, essentially. And Hester just rains chaos over the field and tries to infect the Haints and taint them and, literally plant roots and then burn fire onto the map in the first place. Did I mention the fact that there's also 3 separate different maps that you can utilize? So the map setup is different each time. You can manipulate the tokens on the board, which ones correlate to which areas as well. And then you can also just randomize or have the other person put out, your opponent put out said buildings, townsfolk, or dolls, so that they're not always in the same starting points to make the strategy different. So right there, you're looking at variable ways that the win conditions can be manipulated. Now, that's not even to say that all 3 of these factions, and I haven't touched on it, the next step up for these is those upgrade cards that they all have, their tactics, their upgrades, their abilities that are going to make your faction more strategery, give them more ability to manipulate, or just have more that they can do on their turn. Not in an overwhelming way, but in a way that just adds a slight degree of complexity, a slight degree of tactical nature, but just something to give you a little bit more to chew on as well with an asymmetric aspect of things. So it really works well because there are plenty of times where you're like, man, if I could just have that one more move, or if I could spawn just one more to connect as the family to get that townsfolk, or something along those lines. And those ability upgrade cards, as you get in past the first base level session scenario level of complexity, it really gives you that feeling of, I don't want to say completeness, because it feels very complete even if you just played without any of this other stuff I just mentioned. But it just gives you that added layer of things in a very nuanced way. So by the time you get to it, you are also ready for it. And that cannot be underappreciated when it comes to a game like this as well. The next point I have to make, though, is the very interesting action battling system. And this is going to be a turnoff to a lot of people. And it was originally my biggest concern. And I'll still say I have slight concerns about it as someone who has utilized cube towers to drop cubes in to see when cubes come out to determine the fate of said situation, battle, skirmish, whatever it may be, right? And the issue that I thought was originally going to be there is, well, you drop these cubes and you can just, it says literally you can attack on every action, right? And you can attack, you can spend all 3 of your actions in a round attacking. And you could easily do that. And there are rounds where I have done 2 attacks. But the way that your actions work, the alternating of the actions between player 1 and player 2, and player 1 and player 2 and player 1 and player 2 end round, gives them a good chance to respond. And if you do 2 of your actions back to back as attacking, there's a good chance that they could smother you in the meantime. And what I mean by that is the strengthen action that I mentioned earlier, right? That's the one that puts the cubes into your queue so that when you choose the attack action, those are the cubes you're dropping in the tower. And then how many cubes come out of the tower determines how well the battle goes. The battle then is determined by that. Dropping cubes in a tower that is hidden, that doesn't allow cubes just to flow through. Now, this is my main critique. I have another game from Ape Game Studios. With Stygian Society, which is the other one that I've played with this, the cubes went through, but they did not go through en plethora all the time. In a few of our plays here for Harrow County, there were a lot of cubes going through almost every single time. Like 3 to 5 cubes on each side almost every single time. And I worry that it's just needs a little bit of tweaking interiorly, and that's engineering is not my thing. So I leave that up to them, and if they're happy with it, more power to them. But how that relates to what I was saying is you only drop down what's in the queue. Well, and you can add potentially 1, maybe 2 cubes if the conditions are right. Like if you have more characters in your hex that you're attacking from than your opponent, you get to add a cube, and you get a free action when you choose the attack action of either moving, strengthening, or spawning. And so you could, strengthen there as get 1. So you could get with 2 cubes. But if their cubes are left in there, you could be putting 2 cubes or even 1 cube in and getting like 4 cubes out on their side of things. And that's where sort of the Haint Clash, where you have two of these ghost creatures. If there's no legendary characters battling, if the defense wins, you can actually be penalized as an attacker. The defense can actually get a point because you can each spend 2 cubes to knock out each other's Haints off of the map altogether. And for a defender at that point, that's great. And for the attacker, that's less than ideal. But that's sort of the mitigation that it gives you for the randomness that is dropping the cubes in the first place. So if you're the defender and you can load up, well, there you go. Even if it didn't happen that round, but previously, and you know that there are a lot stock in there. Subsequently, like I said, that is going to be probably the biggest divisive element for a lot of people looking at this game going, I don't really freaking want to drop cubes, right? Like, I love dropping cubes. One of the games in my top 2 for cooperative games is The Loop. And you drop little cubes down the center and they get splayed into 3 different areas. And that's also what Stygian Society does, where if they land in a certain area, they get double value, right? They've got a little pig pen area, I don't know what it's called, a little fenced-in area down at the bottom. And so if they flow out to that, and that was a lot of engineering, I bet, to figure out, where exactly they're going to land and if they can land in there, and, to make sure that they actually do land in there occasionally. Something like that to change the dynamic again. But at the same time, does it need it? No, not really. But that's also where some of those tactics cards, when you go to scenario 2, when you go to scenario 3, when you go to scenario 4, to get some more of that asymmetry, to get some more of that, Swiss cheese, lettuce, and tomato to add to your sandwich, as opposed to, as a kid, just having, a ham and bread sandwich. Or if you're Dutch like I am, they put butter on it. Don't ask, it's not good. Anyway, but you know what I'm saying? It's adding those layers to give it a fuller feel, but you don't have to either, and you'll still have a relatively full game experience that you'll enjoy. Is it better with that stuff? Yeah, it is. It is. Do I recommend starting with that stuff? No, I don't. Because even with the first playthrough or 2, a couple of those little nuanced rules, like when you attack, you get that extra free move, strengthen, or spawn, is going to just be completely missed a few times. And it has a potential to change the outcome of the tower with the cube droppings if you miss the extra cube that could be given for that extra action, or for if you have more, characters in that area to begin with than your defender. The other aspect of things that I wasn't really expecting, that I enjoyed, but is going to be the other, more of the pick up and deliver, if you will, if you go back to the beginning. It's, if you are the protectors, you are bringing townsfolk back, and you basically have to make a train of your characters, haints and characters included and paths included, to get them back to your home space to get 2 points instead of just the 1 that you get for knocking out a haint. The family does the opposite, trying to make a beeline connection continuous with storms that encircle the hexes to the houses that they're trying to destroy. And those also get 2 points. And it's how you want to achieve knocking out, destroying, and or bringing those people back home, depending on which side you are, combined with the last point that I didn't really mention of King of the Hill, because you guys are a bramble spot in the middle of this map. And if you control that at the end of the round, I emphasize that because it's not turn, the round, then you're also going to get a point. And like I said, now battling, rambling, connecting, that's 4 points right there that you could do in 1 turn. And that is why I mentioned that this is more of a rush, because our first game, the very first game we played, you play up to 7, right? Until the end of the round is when you check the score. If someone hits 7, though, mid-round, you don't stop. So our first game ended up being 9-8. And it was that close. My wife was like, oh man, you got to 8 at the beginning of the round. I got one of my townsfolk back, and then I scored another point for knocking out a haint, right? And it's 9-6. And then all of a sudden, she gets the bramble, she gets the brambles in the middle, area control, and she knocks out one of my haints, and it's 9-8, and she put me on the edge as, I could have almost lost. So it's there. The tension is there already. They've done a great job, just like Mind Management, of giving you the tension without feeling overwhelmed with the minutia and the rules in this game. And that's pretty much almost as glowing of an endorsement that I can give, right? Because I think a lot of people would say that's what they're really looking for in a game like this. You know? The mechanics that give the tension, that allow the dynamic storytelling and the recollection of really not necessarily exciting, but fun, memorable plays. Right? You can tell that a lot of thought has also gone into this, because even things like the storms that I mentioned on the family side of things, the brambles, the paths that are flippable on the protector side, right? There are certain conditions that are going along with that. The certain things that you can tell that this has been designed and tested and modified, because you have to be only playing the storms on an area where the haint actually are, or you can only play a path or bramble as a special ability on the protector side that is within range of your main character. Because the ability to put them anywhere or to loosen those restrictions up would be, considerably detrimental or considerably overpowered. And so the restraint in some of that, not to make it too ridiculous of the things that they can do and manipulate and modify on the board, is very nice. And the upgradable of ways to, use these powers as they change, and getting you more asymmetry, getting you more strength, and how you choose to barter out your strength between your abilities, between your actions, between all of these things, is really just kind of freaking cool. Meaningful choices there. How do you want? Do you want to be spawning a bunch of stuff? Do you want to be moving around as much as possible? Do you want to be having as many haints around? Do you want to be, just super, attacking? Do you want to be, ability driven? Do you want to be just having like 6 wild tokens and, getting 6 actions that, you can utilize on your turn as well? And do you want to just, specialize on your legendary skills more so than some of the basic ones? How are you going to split those things? Last thing I didn't mention was I wish more games did this as well with the wild tokens, right? You play the wild ability Mason Jar, and you draw a wild token, and then you get as many wild card actions as you have tokens, right? And you go, well, Chris, that doesn't sound very interesting. Well, it's because you don't discard the tokens, right? So the first round that you take it, you only get one. You get one of the 3 main things that I mentioned, the spawning, the moving, and the strengthening. Well, the next round that you flip that mason jar over, well, then you grab a second token, and then you get 2 of those, and then you get 3 of those, and then you get 4 of those. And so, if you utilize that action every single round, by the 4th or 5th round, when things are really getting heated up, that is really a powerful action. Because especially for the protectors, it allows them to manipulate some of their actions, just like the bag drawing on the family side of things, allowing you to mitigate things, again, in a meaningful, decisive way. So that's Harrow County. So final thoughts. This game probably plays more like a retail ready game, and I dare say, of the games that I've played that are pre-crowdfunding, currently crowdfunding in some shape, manner, or form in 2022, this is probably the best game that I have played from that aspect. I put it that highly. Is everyone going to like it? That's a whole nother area of conversation, because like I said, those key aspects of the area control that take that, the action selection with a slight engine build, those are going to be, your mileage may vary. How much of that are you okay with? Especially the take that, because it does play a slightly more than prominent role, especially with the dropping of the cubes in the first place. And I can see people being very mixed about the cube thing. That's probably easily the most divisive element to all of this. It works, and it forces you, the way it's manipulated between the battlefield and the strengthening action, to make it matter, so that you can't just spam attack, because I think that's the mechanism that sort of handicaps you or limits you to just all-out attacking, like I mentioned, on a turn-by-turn basis to score up points, because that wouldn't be very fun either. So I think it does a nice job of already thinking through, how can we avoid this just being a smashing slog and more of a tactical king of the hill, back and forth tug of war. There you go. Harrow County. Like I said, So I give a lot of credit and a lot of kudos to Off the Page Games. I was not expecting it to be this good. You know, there are certain games that you go into and you say, I'm going to like this game. I'm going to love this game. I know this game is for me. And there are other games that you go, wow, this is really, you know, surprising. This one reminds me of one that took me by surprise. The one last year that I was super hyped about was Beast from Mid-Hall Studios. This gives me very similar vibes of, wow, when people get their hands on this, they are really going to freaking like it. Is it for everybody? No, just like Root's not. But the people that want something like this, that are looking for something like this, oh yeah. So there you go. Stay classy. Off the Page Games, thank you for sending it so I could even, you know, play it and talk about it in the first place. So there you go. Tune in, subscribe, click, whatever you want to do. Do the YouTube thing, you know, up here, down there, whatever it is. So that's all I got. Thanks for watching. See you around. Wha-bam!